Yes.
Julie Menanno, welcome to Roll with the Punches.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So good to see you. We were just having a chat about how we're on different days, different ends of the day, and how weird that is. And how weird it is that you get to have a white Christmas and we are sitting in the scorching sun at that time of year.
I was just saying I can't even wrap my head around it. It's
Yeah,
so funny to me.
we were talking.
Christmas is just so winter here.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what we say on our Christmas cards. It's kind of funny because you grow up with that. We grow up with that, and you don't
hmm
even think about how it doesn't compute to what we actually experience.
yeah. So is your experience the same? Does it seem strange to you for Christmas to be associated with winter?
Well, it doesn't hit because you just grow up seeing cards with Santa Claus and snow and snowmen and
Yes.
reindeers, and that's normal.
Yes.
And then it's like, hang on, that's not normal. That
Yes.
doesn't happen
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
Until you,
Totally.
I was 39 years old when I first had that thought, which is right now. I'm like, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, I mean, I see. I thought that all your Santas were in shorts and with surfboards. So I'm learning something new too.
No, only if you get I guess the Aussie edition, which is just a novelty edition, which we laugh about.
Yes,
But yeah,
yes.
how interesting. Um, I'm excited about today's chat. All things relationships. I've done one relationship episode, a relationship specific episode once before with Dr. John DeMartini, and
Okay,
it went down very well. People like to talk about relationships, as you would
they
know.
do. I do. Unless you're at a party and you tell them that you're a relationship therapist, and then they definitely don't want to talk about it.
Oh my God, what do you
I think
say?
people like to talk about it a step removed,
When
because
people
it's,
ask you what you do you say I'm a relationship therapist? Or do you keep that
I
under
do,
wraps?
and I get dead silence almost all the time. Like, oh, yeah. People don't, it's interesting because if you think about it, people are extremely interested in the topic, but I think people just don't really want to open up about their own relationship um, publicly so
Do you feel like in that moment they almost have a little hidden moment of truth where they're like, oh my goodness, I don't want her to see me. I don't want her to know what doubts or relationship struggles or what things are going on in my personal life, and she'll be able to see me as
yes.
the relationship Jedi.
Yes, and I think that it's that people really do believe that they're the only ones having relationship problems for the most part. I mean, I think there are some couples that, it's obvious on the surface because they're fighting in front of people or whatever. But I think for the most part, people really believe that they're alone. And so, and I have to constantly tell the couples I work with, I actually just finished a session 30 minutes ago. And the last thing I said is the only difference between you guys and all the other couples out there is that you guys are in here doing the work because they start to believe, oh, we're just so messed up. And I'm like, no, I see what goes on behind closed doors. And it's kind of,
Yeah.
a lot of people.
I caught up with a good friend of mine this week, and she's married, and her and her husband, like always, she's a bit older than me, but it's like talking to a teenager. Like you can tell that
Mhm.
relationship's really happy and healthy. But even in that conversation, she said, "Oh, we got a bit lazy. So what we've been doing is organising more stuff together because you kind of get in the
Mhm.
routine of doing. I'll do my stuff with my friends, and you do your stuff with your friends, and not doing activities
Yes.
together." And it was interesting to hear that, and really nice. And
hmm
I think everybody, like, we think that relationships aren't work, they just happen.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, as you're talking, I'm, an expert on relationships, and I'm seeing that happen in my own relationship where we need to like pause and start spending some time together
Yeah.
because we're kind of in a place where we're doing too much separateness right now. And I can feel the tension starting to build. So it's just the only difference between me and other people that aren't as, I guess, relationship savvy, is they're not catching it and working on it,
Yes. Yeah.
and then it kind of builds and builds. So it's a constant process of, hey, how's this going? What do we need to do? Are we in a good spot with each other, checking in and
Yeah. Were you
giving it time and energy.
Were you a relationship therapist when you met your partner?
Oh, no, I was not a relationship therapist. I did not. I had absolutely zero interest in this work. In fact, when I went to grad school, the last thing I wanted to do was be a relationship therapist. And it's funny because I lived in California at the time, and in California, to be, what we call a master's level therapist, you have probably 90% of therapists in California have what's called an LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And even, most of those people don't even work with couples. Most LMFTs work with individuals because it's kind of like the king of state licenses there. And so I had to get that because it's kind of one of the most convenient routes. And I deeply resented that. I did not want to be called an LMFT.
Wow.
But we didn't have this license that other states had, which is called licensed clinical professional counselor. And I just was so annoyed that I had to be called a marriage therapist because it was the last thing I wanted to do until I started doing it. And then I fell in love with it. Yeah. Because I had to do it to get my hours, to get my license. They make you see a certain number of couples. You just have to as part of the qualification process. And I fell in love with it. So here I am.
What was it about that you fell in love with?
Easy answer. When I was working with individuals, I do really deep work and I really bond with my clients and, really create a lot of emotional safety, because the more emotionally safe someone is, the more they're going to open up and be able to do the therapy. And it just bothered me that they were going home to relationships that weren't emotionally supportive. And I didn't like that they were just getting it from me and I could only work with them. So it's some therapists have different experiences and that's not a problem for them. But for me, it just felt like there was a piece missing. And so when I started working with couples, I started being able to create that bond between the two of them. So I have the bond between me and each of them because, again, I need to create that emotional safety, but it doesn't stop there. That energy goes between the two of them and they get to leave with that. And they get to leave with that emotional support that we all like from therapy.
Yeah, because I think the thing about therapy is we think that we just swoon on in for an hour and that's the work and that's it.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah.
I feel like it takes a decade. It takes a decade of doing that before you're like, all right, I've got to do the work outside of. It's not like, hey, here I am. Here's what I've perceived my issue to be.
Right.
You whatever button you need to press, whatever wave you want. I'll figure it out for you. I remember that's what I was like when I first went to see a therapist. I was like, okay, I've done the groundwork here. Here I am.
Right.
Is the issue I'm experiencing?
Let me tell you this very long story with a lot of details about this this instance in my life. That's it. With couples, it's so much easier to get around that. It's hard with individuals to kind of cut through that, but that storytelling, which we need to know, but we're looking for patterns. We're looking for deeper patterns, and sometimes people get so stuck in details, and they don't know any better. Nobody does that on purpose. But if for anybody listening out there, utilize your therapy efficiently. Help the therapist help you by not going into too much detail that might not be what the therapist needs to know to actually help you.
What do you think? Do you think, or what percentage of people do you think need a therapist around their relationships, need some sort of therapy?
It's hard for me to say because I work with the people who are coming to me. But looking around in my life, I would say that almost every person I know could benefit from couples therapy. And there are some people I meet here and there that, seem to have they're just fine. But most of us didn't we're not being raised. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I know in the US, we're not really being raised with a lot of emotional health and emotional support. And if we don't have that in a relationship, it's going to show up somewhere. So most people would fall into that category. If I had it my way, every couple would have 5 sessions of couples therapy the minute they decide to be committed to each other. And just to get it, because it's so much easier to prevent problems than it is to repair them later. Because what happens is just so much mistrust and damage can get built up when couples are communicating in ways that are emotionally unsafe, because it's just creating, it's reinforcing the lack of emotional safety and insecure attachment. So it's just so much easier to prevent it from the get-go and give couples tools to communicate.
I remember seeing one of your posts. You've got an incredible Instagram account, which is why I reached out
Thank
to
you.
you, because I've followed it for a while and I love it. And one of the recent posts, you were talking about the rupture and repair and the necessary fighting and the rupture and repair of relationships. Do you want to talk about that a bit? Because I feel like most people will be like, oh, what? I should have ruptures in relationships?
Right. Most people think that, we're supposed to just not fight, and that's the answer. And that's actually not the answer. The answer is to fight, without doing a lot of damage to the relationship. And when that damage does get done, to be able to fully repair. And you really have to know some solid emotional support skills to be able to make that repair, because it requires validation, being able to step into the other partner's world and see it through their eyes, and be able to empathize and be able to express your own wants and needs in a healthy way, from a place of self instead of from a place of criticism and attack. And it requires that you are able to take in concerns without becoming defensive. And so couples can't do that 100% of the time. Our resources get limited. Usually that comes from outside stressors, like we're tired, we're hungry, we're overworked, there's, stuff with the kids happening. And then it also comes from issues that couples haven't had to tackle yet. Like maybe they're buying their first house together and they haven't made a big purchase together. And this is new and we don't know how to navigate that. So that's possibly going to bring up some conflict, or having a baby, or any kind of big life changes that couples just haven't learned to work through. And so we're not looking for not having those ruptures. We're looking at using these emotional support skills to repair. And from that, we grow and we learn. And so we learn to start, navigating these things and building up experiences of how to work through problems. And so if couples aren't doing that, they're going to stagnate and just nobody's growing.
I used to have talk to me first a little bit about attachment styles. This is something that only came into my world of awareness like a few years ago, which I thought was interesting.
Well, it's been locked up in the therapy room for about 3 decades, until the past, I would say 5-6 years. I didn't even learn attachment theory in grad school. I had to learn about it all in my own time. Yeah, I think now it's definitely being taught in most programs. But so attachment theory is basically that you build a template around relating with close others in your life, kind of based on the amount of emotional support you received in childhood. And that can shift over time, and you can also be deeply impacted by really important and close adult relationships. But for the most part, we're picking this stuff up in childhood when our brains are just rapidly forming and learning how to navigate in the world. And so if you grew up knowing in your heart that most of the time you were going to be able to reach to a parent or a caregiver for emotional support and connection, they would be available to you most of the time. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And even a response could even be, hey, I'm busy right now. Let's talk later. It doesn't have to be, parents don't have to drop everything right then and there. Sometimes, that's also depends on the age. An infant is definitely going to need stuff dropped right then and there to be attended to. But later, as the child gets older, they can start to wait longer in moments when they need to, which is great because then they develop resilience. And for those children who got an unpredictable response, meaning that they never quite knew if they were going to be responded to. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. They develop anxiety. Like, am I going to be responded to? Am I not going to be responded to? And what happens is even in moments when they're responded to, they can't trust it because they don't know if it's going to be there in the future. And that's called an anxious attachment. And that will look like in adulthood, just never really being able to settle in to a feeling of safety in the relationship, even when the relationship is relatively safe. There's a lack of, a little bit of mistrust there all the time, a little bit of hypervigilance. Is my partner going to be there to validate me? Are they going to be here in critical moments when I need them? And then there's the avoidant attachment where during childhood, they just really weren't responded to at all, or they were responded to intrusively. And either way, they learn to cut off from emotions because it doesn't feel safe to have them. And so then they grow up not having any connection with their emotional selves. So it's very difficult for them to connect. It's very difficult for them to be emotionally supportive because they just don't know how. They never got it. And because of some, complicated relationship balancing dynamics that I won't go too far into, anxious partners and avoidant partners tend to pair up. And so what happens is they pair up, and the anxious partner is kind of always trying to close the distance in the relationship for both of them. The avoidant partner is always trying to keep things from getting too escalated and worse. And in the process, they're just reinforcing each other's insecure attachment. So they start to get in fights that look like this. The anxious partner brings up a concern, a real legitimate concern, even in the healthiest way possible. But usually not if they haven't done some work. So let's say they bring it up in a criticism or critical or protesting kind of way because they don't trust they'll be heard because they didn't grow up in an environment where they will be heard, where they were heard. The avoidant partner gets defensive because they don't want to be seen as a failure. And so they start defending themselves, and then the anxious partner understandably feels invalidated, and they get more escalated. And as they get more escalated, the avoidant partner starts to feel more panicked, and then they might start arguing details or maybe even get a little escalated back and counterattack. And then the anxious partner feels worse, escalates, and then bam, the avoidant partner just shuts it down. And so now the avoidant partner's off comforting themselves with whatever, video games, working on a project, watching TV, and the anxious partner is now an anxious wreck, wondering when, trying to repair because it's too stressful for them to have this rupture happening. And then they don't know how to repair it in a healthy way. So then the tension is there for a while, and then they both start thinking, oh, let's come together. This tension is too much. They come back together, and there's kind of a honeymoon feeling. But the real issue is pushed under the rug only to pop up again later.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
That was a lot.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? What are the,
no.
Do you know, like, stats or percentages on kind of how many people are walking around with secure attachment styles versus avoidant?
The most recent research that I have read, there might be new statistics out now. In fact, I need to look into that. But 50% secure. And then the other 40% would be divided relatively evenly, I think, between anxious and avoidant, maybe a little bit more avoidant, I believe. And then the final 8 to 10% is called disorganized, which I didn't address. But disorganized is when there's just such a level of unpredictability in your environment, and the responsiveness is so limited that those with disorganized attachments, they just don't have the ability to trust anybody. And that's going to show up in lots of different chaotic kind of behaviors.
And can we, as adults, at any point when we learn about ourselves, can we shift these attachment styles, or do we just need to work with them for life?
Oh, no, it's absolutely about shifting them. We want to create a secure attachment with ourselves, and then that will translate into secure, a secure attachment with our partner, as long as they're kind of, working on themselves too. And then that secure attachment with a partner then facilitates and strengthens secure attachment with self, because you start to walk around the world feeling safe. Children who feel safe have more energy to grow. And same with adults. Adults that feel safe in their relationship and aren't experiencing a lot of relationship stress also have more room to devote energy to growing. So if I were to put it in a nutshell, what healing looks like, it looks like learning to parent yourself. It looks like all of, these other therapy strategies that we hear about, but then this added layer that's sometimes missing, which is, what is emotional support? Can I emotionally validate myself? Do I empathize with myself? Am I self-compassionate? And until we can start to learn to give that to ourselves, it's very difficult for us to give that to others or to take it in from others.
Yeah. And would I be right in saying that, in general, the secure attachment style individuals are more likely to meet and connect with secure, and your anxious
Yes.
and avoidant are just out there playing this wretched cycle of
Yes.
reinforcement?
Yes, absolutely.
And for those individuals, is it about connecting with a secure, or both learning to work with one another to kind of hit to balance and heal?
Well, it's not a real sustainable strategy if you have an insecure attachment to try to find someone with a secure attachment, because if the first thing is that you have to have a felt sense of emotional security. You have to have a felt sense of emotional availability to even know what to look for. So if you're not used to emotional comfort and emotional connection in a healthy way, you're not going to know, how to even find that. And if you do know how to find it, then there's a good chance that you have an emotional attachment with yourself, because it's a more of a felt experience than anything else. It's not something you can necessarily write down on paper. When you're sitting at a table with someone having dinner, when you're feeling seen and heard and validated and understood, even if it's just on a surface level first date kind of a thing. I had someone recently tell me they had been dating someone for a long time, and they said, what attracted to you? I'm sorry, they had just broken up with someone they had been dating. And she said, what attracted you to your husband? And I said, well, I felt really seen. I felt really seen by him. He was very curious about me and my life. And she said, oh, well, that was one of the things that was wrong with Alex, let's say. She was like, he never asked me about me. He just wanted to talk about his own life and his own self. And he never really asked me about, he'd ask me about work, but he never really asked me about my past or my feelings. And that would be a red flag to anybody with the secure attachment, because they would, so what she's telling me is, I never really felt seen growing up. So this wasn't a red flag to me. It was just normal. And so really the answer here is to develop a secure attachment, or find someone who doesn't have a secure attachment but is willing to work with you, who's good enough. They're good enough, and they're willing to say, hey, I want to work on the relationship. I want to see it in the same way we would view a plant, taking care of it, giving it the sun and the water and the soil. And
it's really interesting. Quite a few years ago, I'd met someone, and very, very quickly it turned out that, and I'd started doing some, it was right at the beginning of my kind of therapy journey and so when I met this person, I opened up and I said, look, I'm doing a lot of work on myself, and I have an avoidant attachment style, and I learned that about myself, and at that time, I didn't even at that time, avoidant and anxious and all of those terms of attachment styles weren't even in my wheelhouse. But I knew that I was seeking therapy, and the common theme is I was going to the therapist saying, I need to work on my ability to build relationships, and not just partner, intimate relationships, but all of my relationships. I feel like I need to do some work. There's some stuff going on.
Sure.
And So I met this person and I opened up to them and they were really accommodating. But within 3 months, I'd come to realise that they were an extremely toxic person and
Okay.
weren't what they had appeared to be. And eventually had to get an intervention order against them. And then I kind of went
Oh,
into hiding.
gosh.
Yeah, so then I went into
Oh,
hiding for
that's
3 years.
really, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was pretty awful.
Yes, that
But
must have been terrifying. Wow.
yeah, so I went into hiding for 3 years in terms of relationships, and I was doing boxing at the time, so I'd started boxing and I just went into that sport, and I was like, yes, sweet. And I remember one day saying to my housemate, I should date again. It's been 3 years since that happened. Like, so we go speed dating, and then I meet someone, and within 3 catch-ups, 3 dates, I had opened up to him about my past experience with that, and we go on this 3rd date. Then he rings me afterwards and is like, I want to talk to you, and he tells me that his former partner has an intervention order against him, and because I'd told him about this experience. Anyway, long story short, it was another tumultuous 6 months of getting an intervention order against him, because I said, that's cool, thanks for telling me, but no. And what I realised about myself in that moment was, okay, so when I feel a sense of safety that I'm perceiving and reframing as attraction or safety or whatever it is, my nervous system or something within me is connecting with the absence of someone who's truly available, the absence of someone who's safe. And that familiarity says to me, hey, this is something, and I move towards it. And so it was interesting because I didn't have the words for it, but I was like, all right, well, what I do know is when I feel good, don't trust that, don't go near it. And it's, it was interesting.
Yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then it's just been a really long journey of picking that apart and working on it and towards better things, but also seeing how all of these things play out in life. And I think the trickiest thing can be when it's, when I remember talking to my therapist and saying, this is what, like, especially after a couple of experiences like that, because you become a little bit more kind of triggered by anything, by relationships or people getting
Yes.
and so I would say, like, safe people, like the feeling of intensity, of disdain, of, like, I'm not open to it. It's
A
like,
safe person.
yeah, a
Yeah.
safe person. So it's really hard. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard for people to work on a change when there's this visceral physical response in the body that's like, this is like, relationships should feel exciting and nice and like a really fun time and a really good thing to go through. But sometimes when you're at certain stages of that work of going, okay, this is going on for me and I need to shift the type of people and I need to practice skills and I need to lean into new experiences, the actual experiences that on the outside are healthy and fun and nice feel really uncomfortable and quite awful.
Well, what what I would say to that is that might not be a good fit either. We don't want healthy doesn't mean boring or not exciting. And maybe, what's going through my mind right now is we want all of those good things on board, but we want to see what happens when there's conflict. That's kind of the defining moment, because attachment styles show up in relationship distress. I mean, they're going to show up in dating. They're going to show up when you're looking for someone, certainly, but you're not really going to see the attachment issues come up until the conflict comes up. And if you can say during conflict, this feels awful, we're getting in these huge fights that go nowhere and we're not repairing, that's when it's time to say this isn't right.
What about...
And then you're right. I mean, there are, what avoidant partners can tend to be attracted to anxious partners because the anxious partner is doing all the feeling for both of them. Usually avoidant partners like that level of passion. It's intent. It feels good for them at first until they start feeling like a failure. Right. And then the cycle starts. And then anxious partners tend to be attracted to avoidant partners because they're the ones keeping things stable. They're the ones who are balancing out. Oh, they're so rational. Oh, they're so, they've really got it together. They're so stable. They make me feel so grounded until the fact that they're emotionally unavailable starts to become a problem.
I was going to say, the idea around how often is the reason that people are attracted to someone or fall in love with someone becomes the reason that they leave, or the reason that they don't, like that same thing. Talk to me about that. Does that happen often?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of balance. So when two people come together who already have a secure attachment, which is also another way to say kind of emotional balance, right? They have a balance of head and heart. They're not overwhelmed by their feelings, but they're in touch with their feelings. And so if you are, overwhelmed by your feelings, you might fall in love with someone who is not overwhelmed by their feelings and in fact can override their feelings and go to work and be a surgeon all day because they can cut, everything off. And that's a great trait. That can seem like a really great trait. Oh, it balances me out. But then it crosses a line into, for someone who has that ability, but also has this insecure attachment, they can't turn it back on ever. They can't go, okay, I need to go to work. So I need to put the fight that we had this morning to the side. And then after work, come home and say, hey, we need to address this. Instead, they just put it to the side forever, indefinitely, until it pops up again, in a fight. But so it's that these traits that we like, they are likable and they can feel really good at first, but they're out of balance. They're too extreme. And so then we start to get into the dark side of it. And then the dark side starts to kind of take over. And so what was an emotional stability, I had this client once who loved that his girlfriend was so artistic and so passionate about art, and just would lose herself into art like a child. But then, and that's what attracted him, because he couldn't feel that alive on his own because he was so detached from his emotions. But then what happened is she was so emotionally big and overwhelmed that she would dysregulate during conflict and things would get like just extremely out of control. Well, that is all stemming from kind of the same trait, high emotional intensity. And so we want to dial it back to where it's there, but it doesn't cross over into, unhealthy territory where it's driving the car all the time.
Yeah. And it's all about communication, right? I'm guessing.
It is. It's about communication, but first I would say it's about regulation and engagement. That's really where it starts. We need to be able to regulate well enough to engage in healthy communication without going big, and we need to be able to be engaged with our emotions going into that communication without coming at it from just this really heady place where partners just get stuck arguing the details, or you shouldn't be upset, here's why it's irrational for you to be upset, instead of I get it, I get why you're mad, it makes so much sense to me. Here are my thoughts about it, but I also understand that you're mad, instead of, well, you shouldn't be mad because ... So I would say, just to kind of reiterate that, yes, it's about communication, but to take it a step back, we need to engage in that healthy communication with these skills I'm trying to teach people. We have to be able to self-regulate and be emotionally engaged at the same time.
I like that you said self-regulate, because I was going to ask then, how much of regulating is up to ourselves as the individuals, and how much of it is a partnership or us helping the other person regulate? How do you manage? So you got two individuals that are losing their minds in the middle of this thing. How does that work?
Well, okay, it's tricky because co-regulation, which is one partner is helping the other partner regulate, is more effective than self-regulation. But co-regulation can't happen until two partners come to the table who know how to self-regulate. So what I'm looking for is, first best option is that both partners can be regulated when there's a tense moment. Second best option is one partner can be regulated enough to help the other partner regulate. third best option is that each partner can self-regulate in times when they need to. In times when, we need to be able to self-regulate. It has to happen because we cannot rely on the world around us to show up as a regulating presence every step of the way. So we need that to happen. However, we also, for a relationship to be healthy, so there needs to be a balance of co-regulating. Each partner needs to be at times able to show up and co-regulate, because we also can't, there are going to be times when our distress levels are high, and it's nice to have that help.
Yeah. Does that tip over into codependency? Like, talk to me about codependency.
Codependency is actually not co-regulating at all. It's just being in a protective stances. It's basically, it's more like, I need to control your internal state so that I don't have to feel distress. It's like kind of using the other person's behavior or feelings to help you feel okay, as opposed to them reaching out to help you feel okay. So it would look like, I'm going to, you're upset, right? You're telling me that you don't like that I give the kids candy, right, after school, right? So instead of showing up and saying, giving emotional support and co-regulating and saying, okay, I see that you're distressed about that. You saw the candy, and I get why you're upset because we've talked about this. It makes sense to me. But you know what? We need to talk about this because I don't necessarily agree with no candy at all. So how can we meet each other? That's co-regulation. Codependency is, okay, fine, I won't give him candy anymore. Fine, no, I won't. Okay, I hear you. I'll do whatever you want. Because it's controlling that other person's experience, just make them happy in the moment. So I don't have to feel this tension and this discomfort around actually addressing the conflict. And that could look any number of ways. It could look like, I'm going to control you to not give the kids candy so I don't have to feel worried and scared in the world. Instead of opening myself up to hearing your perspective and kind of finding a balance. Okay, maybe on Fridays after school, you guys can go get ice cream, so it's more of a treat instead of a regular thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so interesting. How do people, if people are listening and they're starting to question who they are in a relationship, do you have any tips on where can we start, and how do we know what's us and if we're in a more of a toxic partnership than a healthy relationship, and where would we start?
Well, okay, if you're thinking that you're in a toxic relationship, you probably are in a toxic relationship, and you probably have some stuff to work on your own, because you didn't just end up in that toxic relationship out of nowhere, right? That typically doesn't happen. Usually there's stuff going on both sides, and that's hard for some people to hear because we all have blind spots, right? Yeah. It's so easy to say, well, I'm only like this because they're like this. So we got to get out of that mindset. We got to get into a mindset of, look, yes, they have issues. I have issues too. We've both got issues. We came to this relationship with issues. Even if one person's behavior is way worse than the other, we both have to have issues. That's why we're here together. And we've created this relationship where we're communicating in these faulty ways that we're both contributing to that are keeping us stuck. And unless there's, some caveats to that. If it's an abusive situation, then that's not good to work on that until you separate and that person gets help, the abusing partner. But for the most part, what I see 99% of the time is that both partners are contributing equally to the communication breakdown. And so the first step is to really kind of adapt to that philosophy. There's stuff I can do on my end over here to create a relationship environment that's most likely to facilitate growth. And maybe that will happen and maybe it won't happen with my partner, but I can do stuff over here. I can stop reinforcing their whatever. I can start showing up in a new way. I can start delivering my concerns in the healthiest way possible. I can stop being defensive. I can start setting boundaries around the name calling that starts to happen in arguments and say, hey, I can't do this. This isn't safe for either of us. And it really depends on what's going on in the unique relationship to know what to work on. But the goal is to stop your part of the negative cycle, what I call the negative cycle. And to get there, you got to learn to self-regulate. You have to learn to step out and go, okay, how am I going to, let me take a pause. Let me check in with myself. What meaning am I making of this behavior? What's going on in my body? What are my urges? And how can I show up with my best self right now? And maybe I need to go take a 30-minute break to get regulated. And then at that point, when you feel like you're, the first thing I'm doing with couples is getting them to that point. Don't go down the same path. Don't continue having the same fight over and over. Stop, take a break. I don't care what you do, but don't do that. Because every time you do that same repetitive argument, you're just reinforcing your brain's wiring and neural pathways around that behavior. So don't do that. And then once they stop that, and it's not a comfortable place to be, everything in us wants us to go back into that habitual, not healthy behavior, because there's a part of us that really believes at some point it's going to land and I'm going to have control over this situation. If I can get loud enough, eventually they're going to hear me. Or if I just shut this down, eventually they're going to come around and say, you know what, you're right. Well, it never happens. And so the goal after that is then we start building up emotional connection, but we can't do that until we've cleared that bucket of all the dirty water. So to follow up with your question, 1, learn to self-regulate so you're not going into this negative cycle. 2, learn about the negative cycle and what it is and try to understand, when you do this, I get scared or I get sad, and then I do this, and then you get scared and you get sad. Try to understand the deeper patterns that are going on underneath the surface of all these, bad behaviors that are just protective and damaging. So there's a really good book, self-regulation. There's just tons of information out there. Meditating, breathing, cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic experiencing is probably my favorite. And then there's a book called Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. She does a fabulous job of explaining the negative cycle that couples get stuck in.
I love that. So I do a lot of coaching with people one-on-one, and people that are looking for change or just optimizing themselves, their health, their mindset, whatever it is in their lives. And one question that occasionally comes up is when a person's experiencing change, it can cause rifts in the environment around them, both friendships, but also sometimes their partners, and that's where they can find the most resistance. So is it possible for us as individuals to really give ourselves an overhaul and still maintain a healthy relationship in the middle of that? And that's another question that's probably how long's a piece of string, because it's dependent on the partner and the relationship. But
yes,
how would we know, okay, maybe I need to either go into therapy with this relationship as well, as almost a separate secondary thing, or maybe I need some space from it for a period of time and then to come back to it so that I can complete whatever changes to myself I'm ascertaining to?
Yeah, great question. It depends on how much the relationship is overwhelming your coping strategies. So if the relationship is so stressful and your partner is so triggering to you that it's so difficult for you to stay regulated enough, then that would be a situation where you might need to take some space and free up your energy to work on yourself. This would be a situation, and I don't recommend it often, where I have partners separate while they're doing the work, because the relationship environment is so stressful that it's impossible for them to grow in that environment. Most of the time I don't see that, though. And what I say, I hope I'm answering your question, but what I say is that you do your side of the work And don't expect your partner to respond positively at first because it's new and it's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with it. It's confusing. They feel out of control. It's very traumatic for them. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. I mean, it's good. We can't stay stuck, right? So sometimes we have to get popped out of our comfort zone to grow. And then so they start amping up their behaviors, or they start accusing you of being selfish, or attacking you. Oh, look at you, you're so mature now, and because it feels really threatening to them. And so on your end, it takes the discomfort of tolerating their distress and standing your ground. And you can do that in a really comforting, soothing way, which is, I love you. I know this is so hard on you, but we are so stuck that I'm afraid that we're going to lose the relationship if I don't start making these changes. And I'm recognizing I have a lot of work to do on myself. And I know that means I'm going to be showing up differently, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. In fact, I'm showing up differently because I love you and because I love me. And that can be very soothing, as opposed to this old idea of I have to set boundaries because this and that, and I'm not going to tolerate that. We can make these changes and create safety around them. And the idea is eventually the partner has to readjust to the new environment, and it takes a bit, but once they readjust, then they start changing. And then you're over there going, wait a minute, I created a monster. You're not supposed to change too. And they start kind of challenging your behaviors, and then everybody's kind of growing together. And that doesn't mean we're growing at the same rate. Sometimes one partner will grow a lot, and then the partner will catch up, and they'll grow a lot, and then the other partner has to catch up. If that's not happening, if you find that it's been months, it's been a year, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that I'm showing up as my best self in this relationship, that's when you might want to consider the future, and for whatever that looks like. It looks very different for different people. Some people have 4 kids together and they don't have the ability to financially run 2 households, and they have to kind of just stay together in a state of acceptance. Some people are single and they're not living together, and it's just better to cut ties and move on to someone who's willing to grow with you. And then within that process, before splitting up, I would just highly recommend couples therapy to help you even learn what that looks like to show up as your best self, if self-help isn't kind of getting you there.
I love that, and it's such an important conversation, I think, because change is super uncomfortable anyway. Like when we decide that we're going to change, we realize very, very quickly that, this means massive discomfort. This is not going to be like the motivation's going to fade, the work is going to become sticky for a while, and it's not fun. But the thing about relationships is it is such a highly emotional thing. So you can say yes to discomfort, but all of a sudden I feel like people are going to have these huge emotional reactions. I always say you can't have perspective on the things that you're in the middle of, and it's easy to go on a retreat away from work, or it's easy to take a weekend away, be alone, be out of the routine. You can take away the routine, but we're hardwired for this human connection, and we've developed these relationships. And so then when you step away from that, it's like, panic, like our system just freaks out on us. And so it's a whole other layer of understanding and experiencing that.
Absolutely. Even the most positive changes are going to definitely be uncomfortable at first, because we have to face our fears and our feelings. Yeah. We have to face, the fear of the unknown. Yeah. We have to face feeling rejected when we set a boundary. We have to face having our partner, say mean things to us if we're not engaging in a fight with them because they feel abandoned and don't know what to do with their own feelings. Yeah. We have to face a lot of uncomfortable feelings, but that's the growth, is learning to deal with those uncomfortable feelings in a healthy way instead of just doing all these other things that we've been doing. Yeah. And it's especially hard if we don't know what to do. But I'll tell you, a big piece of it is that learning self-trust and self-compassion will get you a lot further in that process, because people with self-trust, they're able to say This is uncomfortable and this is scary and this is overwhelming, but I know I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. You know, I'll manage whatever comes my way. I will somehow learn to, to survive and overcome. And even worst case scenario, somehow I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a trust that people who have secure attachments, they just walk around with this felt sense of trust in the future. And yes, bad things happen, right? Yes, horrible things happen, but most of the time they don't.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's not the end of the world or worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, I want to encourage everyone to go and follow your Instagram, because it is an amazing resource. Like, it's actually...
Thank you.
It's just full of, I feel like you can follow that and really learn practical, just realizations and tips and advice and tactics. And that is the Secure Relationship. So
and there are, I have to put this out there. There are tons of imposter accounts and they duplicate it exactly. I mean, I put a post up, they put a post up, they put the exact same post. So the only way to differentiate is that I have upwards of 900,000 followers. I'm not sure the exact number, but those accounts, I think the most anyone has is like 7,000. So they can't fake the numbers. So that's it. That's the only thing they can.
Tick. That's the thing. Why don't you have
I can't get it. I've applied for it. I have a really big publishing contract with Simon Schuster. I'm represented by the biggest literary agency in the country. Like, and nobody can get me verified. It's like, you guys have the most power of anyone else except for Meta. Meta.
Obviously, Meta's got a bit of an attachment issue.
Yes, exactly.
They need to do some self-regulation and give you the tips.
Yes. I can't, I don't know what's going on, but it's really sad because these imposter accounts, what they do is they reach out to my followers and try to sell them psychic readings from me. And then people actually buy it and they think that I'm defrauding them. And
can't they get shut down? How are those accounts not getting shut down?
They just don't. I don't know.
I'm going to jump on now
Your
and
guess is
report them.
mine. I mean, I've reported them, multiple times. I mean, dozens. It's really sad. I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
Right. Well, how else can people work with you?
Well, I am pretty booked up personally, but I do have a team of therapists working for me, and really we call them coaches. Because as coaches, they can work all around the world. Yeah. And they're directly trained. I meet with every single one of them once a week. And that is the securerelationship.com. So that's where you can go and research. All of them have a little bit of a different specialty, substance abuse, spirituality, LGBTQ, things like this.
Brilliant. Well, thank
Hispanic,
you so much.
Spanish speaking. You're welcome. This has been amazing. Yeah. I can see why your podcast is so popular. You're just so easy to talk to and smart. And
I am a curious cat.
Yes, you are. I love it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, everyone. I'll have all of the links in the show notes, and thank you for tuning in.